The first gunshot tore through the air like a lightning strike, splintering the wooden post inches from Jack Callahan's head. He didn't flinch. The midday sun was a merciless overseer, baking the red earth until it shimmered like molten copper. Sweat stung Jack's eyes, but his gaze stayed locked on the 5 riders fanning out in front of him. Their horses kicked up clouds of ochre dust, the sound of hooves like a war drum rolling across the open plain. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, grinned like a wolf. "You should have kept ridden, Callahan," he called, voice dripping with mockery. "Now you're gonna die where you stand." Jack's hand hovered near the worn grip of his Colt. His heart wasn't racing, not yet. Instead, there was a cold, steady burn in his chest, the kind that came from years of surviving men like these. He'd seen their kind before, the Hollow Creek Gang, rustlers, killers, and worse. They'd taken his cattle 2 weeks ago, burned his barn, and left his ranch hand bleeding in the dirt. Jack had buried the boy himself, and now, here they were, thinking they'd finished the job. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of dry sage and gunpowder. Jack's mind sharpened. Every detail became painfully clear. The twitch in the scarred man's left eye, the way the second rider's hand trembled on his rifle, the faint creak of leather as they tightened their grips. "You boys sure you want this?" Jack's voice was low, steady, almost calm. "'Cause I promise you, you won't all be ridden home." The scarred man laughed, but it was too loud to force. "Kill him." The world exploded. 3 rifles cracked in unison. Jack dove sideways, rolling into the dust, the heat of bullets slicing the air above him. His Colt was in his hand before he hit the ground. He fired twice. The first shot punched through a rider's shoulder, spinning him from the saddle. The second shattered the rifle of another, sending him cursing and clutching his hand. The horses screamed, rearing in panic. Dust swirled like a living thing, choking the air, turning the fight into a blur of shadows and flashes of steel. Jack moved like a man who'd been here before, because he had. He kept low, using the chaos to his advantage, his boots pounding. The hard pan as he closed the distance. A rider came at him from the left, swinging a rusted machete. Jack sidestepped, grabbed the man's arm, and slammed his elbow into the rider's ribs. The machete clattered to the ground. Jack's knee came up hard, and the man toppled from the saddle, gasping for air. Another shot rang out. Close. Too close. Pain flared in Jack's side, hot and sharp. He staggered, but didn't fall. Not yet. The scarred leader was still in the saddle, circling like a vulture. His eyes were cold. Calculating. "You're bleedin', Callahan," he said. "Won't be long now." Jack straightened, blood soaking into his shirt. "Long enough," he said, and fired. The bullet caught the leader in the thigh. He roared, clutching the wound, his horse bucking wildly. Jack didn't give him time to recover. He closed the gap, grabbed the man by the collar, and yanked him from the saddle. They hit the ground hard, rolling in the dust. The fight turned. Brutal, primal, fists, knees, the crunch of bone. Jack's vision narrowed to the man in front of him. The man who'd burned his barn, who'd laughed while his ranch hand bled out. The leader swung a wild punch. Jack caught it, twisted, and drove his fist into the man's jaw. Once, twice, the third time. The man went limp. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged breathing of the survivors. The remaining gang members were backing away, eyes wide, their bravado gone. Jack stood, chest heaving, blood dripping from his side and knuckles. "Tell everyone," he said, his voice like gravel. "Hollow Creek is closed for business." They didn't argue. They turned their horses and rode hard, dust trailing behind them like ghosts. Jack watched them go, the ache in his body a reminder that this wasn't over. Men like that didn't forgive. They didn't forget. But neither did he. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain from far off in the mountains. Jack holstered his Colt, his eyes narrowing toward the horizon. Somewhere, out there, more trouble was coming, and he'd be ready. The dust hadn't even settled when Jack swung into the saddle. His side burned where the bullet had grazed him, each breath a reminder that he'd been close to ending up in the dirt for good. But the pain was just another voice. In the chorus of his life out here, the wind's whistle, the creak of leather, The distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. He didn't ride toward home. Not yet. Home was a ranch with a burned-out barn and a grave marked by a simple wooden cross. Not for prayer, but because it was the only thing he could carve in time before the ground froze that night. The boy buried there, Eli, had been 17. Too young to die, too stubborn to run when the Hollow Creek gang came. Jack's jaw tightened. He could still see Ellie's face in the firelight, soot streaking his cheeks, eyes wide with the kind of fear a man never forgets. The gang had scattered, but Jack knew men like that didn't vanish. They regrouped, they hunted, and if he didn't finish this now, they'd be back, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but someday, and when they came, they'd bring hell with them. The trail was easy to follow. Hoofprints pressed deep into the dry earth, a broken canteen lying in the dust, a smear of blood where the man he'd shot in the shoulder had tried to keep riding. Jack's horse, a rangy bay-named Cutter, moved with steady purpose. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in bruised purples and molten gold. Shadows stretched long across the land, and the air cooled just enough to carry the scent of pine from the distant hills. He thought about turning back, about patching himself up, letting the law handle it, but the law was 2 days' ride away, and the sheriff had a bad habit of looking the other way when trouble wore a familiar face. No. This was his to finish. By the time he spotted the campfire, night had settled in. The flames flickered low, casting jagged shadows against the rocks. He counted 3 men. The wounded one was gone, probably dead or left behind. The scarred leader sat apart from the others, his leg bandaged, a bottle in his hand. Jack dismounted, silently tying Cutter to a mesquite tree. The desert night was alive with sound. The chirp of crickets, the distant yip of a coyote, the crackle of the fire. He moved in low, using the rocks for cover. His Colt felt heavy in his hand, the metal cool against his palm. One of the men laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Callahan's probably halfway to Mexico by now," he said. The scarred man didn't laugh. "You don't know him," he muttered. "He's out there. I can feel it." Jack stepped into the firelight. "You're damn right." The moment froze, eyes widening, hands scrambling for weapons. Jack fired first. The closest man dropped before his pistol cleared leather. The second got a shot off, the bullet whining past Jack's ear. Before Jack's return fire sent him sprawling into the dust, the scarred leader was on his feet, knife in hand, teeth bared. "You should have stayed down, Callahan." Jack didn't answer. He closed the distance, their bodies colliding with bone-jarring force. The knife slashed, grazing Jack's arm, but he drove forward, slamming the man into a boulder. The impact knocked the knife loose. They grappled in the dirt, fists pounding, breath ragged. Jack's vision tunneled. There was only the man in front of him, the man who'd taken everything and still thought he could walk away. With a final surge, Jack drove his fist into the man's jaw. The scarred leader crumpled, unconscious. Jack stood over him, chest heaving, blood dripping from his arm. The fire crackled, throwing sparks into the night. He could kill him, end it here. But death was too easy. Instead, Jack tied the man's hands, slung him over Cutter's saddle, and turned toward town. The sheriff might be useless most days, but even he couldn't ignore a man like this delivered to his doorstep. As they rode, the first light of dawn touched the horizon, washing the land in pale gold. Jack's body ached, but inside, there was a quiet satisfaction. This fight was over, for now. The first crack of thunder rolled across the plains like a warning from the earth itself. Jack Callahan tightened his grip on Cutter's reins as the wind whipped dust into his face. The sky above was a bruised, churning mass of clouds, the kind that swallowed the sun whole. Lightning forked in the distance, illuminating the jagged silhouette of the canyon ahead. He wasn't riding for the sheriff anymore. He was riding for survival. Word had spread fast, faster than he'd expected. The Hollow Creek gang wasn't finished. The scarred leader's capture had lit a fire under the rest of them, and now they were coming with reinforcements, twice as many men, twice as much lead. Jack had seen the glint of rifles on the ridge an hour ago. They were tracking him, waiting for the storm to break. The rain came suddenly, fat drops smacking against his hat brim, soaking into his shirt. The air smelled of wet earth and gun oil, a dangerous mix. Cutter's hooves splashed through the rising mud as they pushed deeper into the canyon, the walls closing in on either side. It was a trap. He knew it, but open ground meant open targets, and he'd rather face them here, where the rocks could give him cover. The first shot rang out, echoing off the canyon walls. Stone chips stung his cheek. Jack slid from the saddle, slapping Cutter's flank. To send him running, he dove behind a boulder just as another bullet whined past his ear. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, the canyon lit up like midday. He saw them, dark shapes moving along the ridge, rifles glinting. Jack's breath came slow and steady. He counted the flashes of lightning, timed the thunder. The storm was his ally now, masking the sound of his boots as he moved from rock to rock. A figure appeared ahead, crouched low, rifle ready. Jack didn't hesitate. One shot, clean and sharp, dropped the man into the mud. The rain was coming harder now, turning the canyon floor into a slick mess. Jack's boots slipped, but he kept moving, Colt steady in his hand. Another flash, another target. He fired, the muzzle flare swallowed instantly by the darkness. The gang was shouting now, their voices ragged, panicked. The storm was breaking their lines, scattering them. Jack used it, striking fast, disappearing before they could regroup. A rifle cracked from above, and pain exploded in his shoulder. He stumbled, teeth gritted, vision swimming, but he didn't stop. He climbed the ridge, fingers clawing at wet rock, boots slipping. Lightning split the sky again, and there he was, the new leader. A hulking man with a shotgun and murder in his eyes. "You should have stayed down, Callahan." He roared over the storm. Jack didn't answer. He lunged, grabbing the shotgun's barrel. Twisting hard, the blast went wide, the sound deafening in the narrow canyon. They grappled, boots sliding in the mud, rain streaming down their faces. The man swung a heavy fist, catching Jack in the jaw. Stars burst behind his eyes, but he held on, driving his knee into the man's gut. The shotgun clattered to the ground. Jack's Colt was gone, lost somewhere in the climb. This was down to fists and fury now. They traded blows, each one jarring. Bone deep, Jack's shoulders screamed with every movement, but he pushed through. The memory of Ellie's grave burning in his mind. With a final surge, he slammed the man against the ridge wall, the impact knocking the fight out of him. Jack's fist came down once, twice, until the man went limp, sliding into the mud. The canyon was silent except for the rain. The rest of the gang had fled, their shouts fading into the storm. Jack stood there, chest heaving, rain washing the blood from his face. Lightning flashed one last time, and in that brief, blinding light, he felt it, not victory, not relief, but the quiet certainty that he'd survived again. For now, the rain had stopped by the time Jack Callahan rode into Hollow Creek. The streets were slick with mud, the wooden boardwalks glistening under the pale morning light. Cutter's hooves clopped softly on the wet planks as Jack guided him toward the livery. Every muscle in his body ached, his shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, and the taste of blood still lingered in his mouth. But the town was quiet, too quiet. The usual morning bustle, the blacksmith's hammer, the chatter from the general store, the clink of bottles from the saloon, was absent. Doors were shut, curtains drawn. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Jack dismounted slowly, scanning the street. He'd brought the scarred leader in 2 days ago, handed him over to Sheriff Mallory himself. The man should have been locked up tight in the jailhouse, but something in the air told Jack that wasn't the case anymore. He pushed through the saloon doors. The smell hit him first, whiskey, stale smoke, and the faint tang of gun oil. Inside, a handful of men sat at tables, their eyes flicking toward him and then away. The piano in the corner was silent, its keys gathering dust. Behind the bar, Mallory stood with a glass in his hand, not a badge in sight. "Callahan," the sheriff said, his voice too smooth. "Heard you had yourself a stormy night." Jack didn't answer. His eyes swept the room, landing on a shadow in the far corner, the scarred leader, very much free. A fresh bandage on his leg and a smirk on his face. Jack's hand twitched toward his Colt. "Easy now," Mallory said, setting the glass down. "Things have changed. The men at the tables shifted, and Jack saw it, the glint of metal undercoats, the subtle tightening of grips. The whole damn saloon was a powder keg, and he was standing in the middle of it. "You let him go," Jack said, his voice low. Mallory shrugged. "Man like him's got friends with deep pockets. Law's got to eat same as anyone." The scarred leader leaned forward, his grin widening. "Told you, Callahan. You can't kill the Hollow Creek gang. We own this town." Jack's pulse slowed. Not from fear, from focus. He'd been here before, in rooms where every man wanted him dead. The trick was to move first. The first shot shattered the whiskey bottle on the bar, spraying glass and liquor. Jack dove sideways, flipping a table for cover as bullets tore into the wood. The saloon erupted in chaos, chairs splintering, men shouting, the air thick with smoke and the acrid bite of gunpowder. Jack fired twice, dropping the man nearest the door. Another rushed him, knife flashing, but Jack caught his wrist, twisted hard, and sent him crashing into a card table. Mallory ducked behind the bar, cursing. The scarred leader was moving for the back door, limping but fast. Jack vaulted over the table, shoving through the haze. A bullet grazed his hat brim, spinning it off his head, but he didn't slow. He caught the leader just as he reached the door, slamming him into the wall. "You should have stayed in that cell," Jack growled. The man swung a wild punch, but Jack blocked it, driving his fist into the man's gut. The leader doubled over, and Jack brought his knee up hard, sending him sprawling to the floor. The room was still now, save for the groans of the wounded. Jack stood over the scarred man, chest heaving, eyes locked on Mallory. "This town's yours," Jack said. "Not anymore." He holstered his Colt, grabbed the leader by the collar, and dragged him out into the street. The townsfolk were peeking from behind curtains now, watching as Jack hauled the man toward the jailhouse. This time, he wasn't leaving him in Mallory's care. The sun was sinking fast, bleeding red across the horizon. Jack Callahan stood in the middle of Main Street, the scarred leader locked in the jailhouse behind him. The air was heavy, still, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm, only. This one wouldn't bring rain. It would bring lead. Word had spread. The Hollow Creek gang was riding in. Not just a handful this time, the whole damn lot of them. 20 men, maybe more. Enough to burn the town to the ground and salt the earth after. Jack had given the townsfolk a choice, run or fight. Most had run. A few stayed, the blacksmith with arms like iron, the storekeeper's boy who could shoot straighter than most grown men, and old May from the saloon, who'd been loading shells into a shotgun since before Jack was born. They were all here now, scattered along the boardwalks, rifles ready, eyes hard. The first sound was the distant thunder of hooves. Then the dust cloud appeared on the far ridge, glowing in the dying light. The gang rode in a loose formation, their silhouettes jagged against the sky. Jack's heart was steady. His shoulders still ached from the canyon fight, but he pushed the pain aside. Tonight wasn't about him. It was about making sure Hollow Creek didn't fall. The gang slowed as they reached the edge of town. Their new leader, a tall man with a black duster and a face like carved stone, rode forward. "Callahan," he shouted, "hand him over, and maybe we'll let you live." Jack stepped forward, boots crunching in the dirt. "You want him? Come take him." The leader's grin was thin and cold. "Have it your way." The street erupted. Gunfire cracked from both sides, the air filling with smoke and splinters. Jack dropped behind a water trough, firing at the riders as they charged. One went down, tumbling from the saddle. Another's horse reared, screaming. Before bolting into an alley, the blacksmith's rifle boomed from the roof of the general store. Dropping to more, May's shotgun roared from the saloon porch, the blast echoing off the buildings. But the gang kept coming. Jack moved fast, darting from cover to cover, his Colt barking in his hand. A bullet tore through his sleeve, grazing his arm, but he barely felt it. He saw the leader pushing through the chaos, eyes locked on the jailhouse. Not happening. Jack broke from cover, sprinting across the street. Bullets kicked up dust at his heels. He slammed into the leader's horse, grabbing the man's coat and yanking him down. They hit the ground hard, rolling in the dirt. The leader swung a heavy punch, but Jack blocked it. driving his elbow into the man's ribs. The fight was brutal, close, fists, knees, the scrape of boots on gravel. Round them, the battle raged. The storekeeper's boy took down another rider. May reloaded with shaking hands but steady eyes. The blacksmith roared as he swung a rifle, but into a man's jaw. Jack and the leader grappled, each trying to get the upper hand. The man's strength was raw, but Jack fought with something deeper, the memory of Eli, the smell of burning wood, the sound of a boy's last breath. With a final surge, Jack slammed the man's head into the dirt. The fight went out of him. Jack stood, chest heaving, scanning the street. The gang was breaking, some dead, some fleeing into the night. The few who remained dropped their weapons, hands raised. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of a lantern swinging in the wind. Jack looked at the townsfolk, tired, bloodied, but standing. Hollow Creek was still theirs for now. The morning after the siege, Hollow Creek looked like a town caught between life and death. The street was littered with broken boards, spent shells, and the dark stains of blood that the night's rain hadn't washed away. The air smelled of smoke and iron. Somewhere, a door creaked in the wind, the sound hollow in the silence. Jack Callahan stood on the boardwalk outside the jailhouse, his hat pulled low against the pale sun. Inside, the scarred leader sat in a cell, bruised and sullen, his eyes tracking Jack like a rattlesnake waiting for the right moment to strike. The townsfolk who had stayed to fight were moving slow, patching bullet holes in walls, sweeping glass from windows. They nodded to Jack when they passed, but their eyes carried something heavier than gratitude, a question they weren't ready to ask. Jack felt it too. The gang had come hard and fast, but something about it didn't sit right. They'd risked too much for one man, even a leader, and the way they'd ridden straight into town, as if they knew exactly where to hit. That wasn't luck, that was planning. He left the jailhouse in the blacksmith's care and walked the length of Main Street. The saloon was half empty, chairs overturned, the piano missing a leg. May was behind the bar, cleaning a shotgun that didn't need cleaning. "You hear anything?" Jack asked. May's eyes flicked up. "Depends what you're listening for." "Anything. About who's been feeding the gang information." She hesitated, then leaned in. "You didn't hear it from me, but folks say the gang's been working for someone bigger. Someone who doesn't ride into town with a gun, just sends others to do the bleeding." Jack's jaw tightened. "A name." May shook her head. "Only whispers. A land baron out east. Owns half the valley. Wants the other half." Jack left the saloon with a weight in his chest. He'd seen men like that before. The kind who never dirtied their boots, but still left bodies in there. Wait. As he crossed the street, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A man in a long coat was slipping into the alley behind the general store. Jack followed, boots silent on the damp boards. The alley was narrow, shadowed. The man was waiting. "You're making trouble, Callahan," he said, his voice low and smooth, the kind of trouble that gets a man buried in the hills. Jack's hand hovered near his Colt. "You here to do the burying?" The man smiled without warmth. "Not today. I'm just here to tell you, the gang was only the first wave. You keep that man in your jail, and the next one will be worse." Jack took a step closer. "Tell your boss I'm not scared of worse." The man's smile widened, but his eyes stayed cold. "You'll be." He slipped away into the shadows, leaving Jack alone with the sound of his own breathing. The quiet in Hollow Creek suddenly felt sharper, like the moment before a knife slides between ribs. Jack knew then the siege hadn't been the end. It had been the opening move, and the real fight was still coming. The first scream came just after midnight. Jack Callahan was half asleep in the chair outside the jailhouse, boots propped on the rail, Colt resting in his lap. The moon was a thin silver blade in the sky, casting long, sharp shadows across Main Street. The scream cut through the stillness like a whip crack. Then came the gunshot. Jack was on his feet before the echo faded, kicking the jailhouse door open. The scarred leader stirred in his cell, a slow, ugly smile spreading across his face. "They're here," he said. Jack didn't answer. He grabbed his rifle from the wall and stepped into the street. The town was dark, too dark. The lanterns that usually burned through the night were out, snuffed one by one. The only light came from the moon, and even that seemed to dim as a low fog rolled in from the river. Somewhere in the mist, boots crunched on gravel. More than one pair. Jack moved low, hugging the shadows between buildings. His eyes adjusted, picking out shapes. 3 men slipping toward the jailhouse from the east. Another circling from the rear. They weren't charging in like the last time. This was quieter. Smarter. A shadow detached itself from the alley. Ahead, knife glinting in the moonlight. Jack fired once, the shot muffled by the fog, and the man crumpled without a sound. The others froze. Then the night erupted. Gunfire cracked from the rooftops. The gang had men above, firing down into the street. Jack dove behind a water barrel, splinters stinging his cheek. He returned fire, dropping one silhouette from the roof. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement near the jailhouse door. 2 men were working the lock. Jack sprinted, boots pounding the boards, and slammed into them before they could react. The first went down hard, his head hitting the rail. The second swung a knife, slicing Jack's coat. But Jack caught his wrist and drove his fist into the man's jaw. The scarred leader was on his feet inside the cell, watching like a man savoring a show. "You're not getting out," Jack growled, shoving the unconscious man aside. A shout rang out from the saloon, May's voice, sharp and urgent. Jack turned in time to see a figure dragging her into the street, a pistol pressed to her temple. "Drop it, Callahan," the man barked. Jack's rifle was up, but his finger hesitated on the trigger. The man was using May as a shield, backing toward the shadows. Then lightning flashed, not from the sky, but from the muzzle of a shotgun. The blacksmith had stepped from the alley, his shot tearing into the man's side. May broke free, stumbling toward Jack. The gang was breaking again, melting into the fog. Jack fired after them, but the night swallowed them whole when the silence returned. It was heavier than before. The street was littered with bodies, the fog curling around them like smoke from an unseen fire. Jack knew this wasn't over. The raid hadn't been meant to win. It had been meant to test him, to see how far he'd go. And whoever was pulling the strings now knew the answer. The trail led east, away from the dust and blood of Hollow Creek, into the rolling hills where the grass grew tall and the wind carried the scent of rain. Jack Callahan rode Cutter at a steady pace, his eyes scanning the horizon. The strangers' warning still echoed in his mind. The gang was only the first wave. Whoever was pulling the strings had money, influence, and no shortage of men willing to kill for it. Today's out. Jack found the first sign. A burned-out homestead, its charred beams jutting from the earth like blackened bones. The ground was littered with spent shells, and the air still carried the faint, acrid tang of smoke. He dismounted, crouching to study the tracks in the dirt. Heavy wagons, dozens of horses. They'd come through here recently, and they hadn't been hiding their trail. By nightfall, he reached the edge of a sprawling valley. In the distance, lit by the last light of the setting sun, stood a mansion, 3 stories of pale stone, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. A high fence encircled the property, and beyond it, Jack could see the silhouettes of armed men patrolling. This was no outlaw hideout. This was power made flesh. Jack camped in the hills, keeping the mansion in sight. Through the glass of his spyglass, he watched the comings and goings, wagons loaded with crates, riders carrying sealed envelopes, servants moving like clockwork. And then he saw him. The man on the balcony was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat that caught the light like oil. Even from a distance, Jack could see the confidence in his stance, the kind of man who believed the land, the sky, and every soul beneath it belonged to him. The land baron. Jack's jaw tightened. He'd seen men like this before, men who never pulled a trigger themselves, but whose orders left graves in their wake. The next day, Jack rode down into the valley, keeping to the tree line. He found a small town, just beyond the mansion's reach, a place where the people spoke in hushed tones, and glanced over their shoulders before answering questions. At the saloon, the barkeep poured him a drink without asking and leaned in close. "If you're smart, you'll turn that horse around and ride west. Folks who go poking at the Baron don't come back." Jack sipped the whiskey, eyes never leaving the man's. "I'm not here to poke. I'm here to cut the strings." The barkeep paled, glancing toward the door. Then you'd better know. He's got more than gunmen. He's got the law in his pocket, the railroads in his hand, and the banks in his debt. You can't fight that." Jack set the glass down. "Watch me." That night, he slipped closer to the mansion, moving like a shadow through the tall grass. He counted guards, noted the shift changes, and found the weak points in the fence. But as he crouched in the dark, a voice came from behind him. "You're a long way from Hollow Creek." "Callahan." Jack turned slowly. A man stood there, rifle leveled, his face hidden by the brim of his hat. And in that moment, Jack knew. The Baron already knew he was here. The rifle barrel pressed cold against Jack Callahan's neck. "Drop it," the man behind him said. Jack let his Colt fall into the wet grass. It landed with a dull thud. The sound swallowed by the night. Two more figures emerged from the shadows, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats. They moved with the quiet precision of men who'd done this before. No wasted motion, no nervous glances. One of them bound Jack's wrists with a length of coarse rope, the fibers biting into his skin. They didn't speak as they marched him toward the mansion. The gates swung open without a sound, revealing a long gravel drive lined with lanterns. The light was warm, almost welcoming, but Jack knew better. This wasn't welcome, it was display. A show of power. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of polished wood, cigar smoke, and something sweeter, expensive perfume, clinging to the velvet drapes. The walls were lined with oil paintings of stern-faced men and sprawling landscapes, each frame heavy with gold leaf. They led him into a study. The Baron sat behind a massive desk of dark mahogany, a glass of amber whiskey in his hand. Up close, he was even more imposing, not just in size, but in presence. His eyes were sharp, calculating, the kind that measured a man's worth before he spoke. "Mr. Callahan," the Baron said, his voice smooth as silk over steel. "You've been making quite a mess of my affairs." Jack didn't answer. The Baron gestured to a chair. "Sit." Jack stayed standing. The Baron's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You've cost me men, property, reputation. But what troubles me most is your persistence. Most men know when they're beaten." Jack's voice was low, steady. "Most men don't bury 17-year-old boys because of you." The Baron swirled his drink, watching the liquid catch the light. "Collateral damage, unfortunate, but inevitable. You can't build an empire without breaking a few stones." Jack's jaw tightened. "You call people stones?" The Baron leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. "I call them what they are. Pieces on a board. And you, Mr. Callahan, are a piece that's wandered too far from its square." He set the glass down with a soft click. "I could have you killed tonight, buried in the hills where no one would find you. But I'm offering you a choice. Leave Hollow Creek. Leave the valley. Never come back. Do that, and you live." Jack met his gaze. "And if I don't?" The Baron's smile returned, colder this time. "Then I'll take everything you've ever cared about, and I'll make sure you're alive to watch it burn." Silence stretched between them, heavy as the air before a storm. Finally, the Baron nodded to his men. "Take him back to the edge of the valley. Let him think about it." They hauled Jack to his feet and dragged him out into the night. The gates closed behind him with a sound like a coffin lid sealing shut. Jack stood in the dark, wrists raw from the rope, the Baron's words still ringing in his ears. He knew one thing for certain: he wasn't leaving. The ride back to Hollow Creek was long and silent. Jack Callahan kept Cutter at a steady trot, the Baron's words still echoing in his mind like the low rumble of distant thunder. Leave the valley, or watch it burn. He'd heard threats before, but this one wasn't just bluster. It was a promise from a man who had the means to keep it. By the time the town came into view, the sun was bleeding into the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. Hollow Creek looked almost peaceful from a distance, but Jack knew better. Peace here was a thin crust over boiling water. He didn't go straight to the jailhouse. Instead, he stopped at the blacksmith's. Elias Turner was still hammering at the forge, the glow of molten iron lighting his weathered face. He looked up. As Jack approached, "You're still breathing," Elias said. "Guess the Baron didn't see fit to finish you." "Not yet," Jack replied. "But he will, unless we move first." Elias set the hammer down. Jack nodded. "I can't take him alone." I need people who aren't afraid to stand when it counts. Elias's eyes narrowed. You're talking about war. I'm talking about survival from there. Jack went to the saloon. May was behind the bar, polishing glasses that didn't need polishing. She listened without interrupting as Jack laid it out. The Baron's reach, the gang's return, the certainty that Hollow Creek was next. When he finished, she poured him a drink and slid it across the bar. You'll need more than a few. Rifles, you'll need eyes in places you can't go. Jack raised an eyebrow. You volunteering? May's smile was thin. I've been listening to drunks spill secrets for 20 years. You'd be surprised what I know about the Barons. Friends. By nightfall, Jack had a list in his head. People he could trust, or at least people who hated the Baron enough to fight. Elias for muscle, May for information, the storekeeper's boy for a steady trigger, and maybe, just maybe, a few old faces from his past who still owed him favors. The next morning, he rode out to the edge of the valley, where the land turned wild and the law didn't bother to follow. There, in a weathered shack half swallowed by the hills, he found Caleb Vance, a tracker with a reputation for finding men who didn't want to be found. Caleb opened the door with a rifle in hand. Callahan, thought you were dead. Not yet, Jack said. But I might be soon. I need your help. Caleb studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. If it's the Baron you're after, you'll need more than luck. You'll need to know where he's weakest. That's why I'm here. For the next 2 days, Jack moved like a shadow between Hollow Creek and the hills, speaking to those who might stand with him. Some said yes. Some slammed doors in his face. But slowly, a small, determined circle began to form. They met in the back room of the saloon, maps spread across the table, lantern light flickering over their faces. May pointed out supply routes. Caleb marked guard rotations at the mansion. Elias talked about building barricades strong enough to hold against a mounted charge. Jack listened, memorizing every detail. When the meeting broke, he stepped outside into the cool night air. The town was quiet, but in that quiet he felt something new, not fear, not yet, but the weight of what was coming. The Baron had his empire. Jack had his people dot, and soon the storm would break. The night was moonless, the kind of black that swallowed sound and light alike. Jack Callahan crouched in the tall grass just beyond the valley road, the damp earth cold beneath his boots. Round him, his small crew waited, Elias with his heavy rifle, May with a satchel of dynamite sticks wrapped in burlap, Caleb Vance scanning the darkness like a wolf scenting prey. They'd been watching the road for hours, waiting for the Baron's supply convoy. According to May's whispers from the saloon, the wagons would be carrying rifles, ammunition, and crates of silver, payment for the gang's loyalty. Jack's plan was simple: hit them fast, hit them hard, and vanish before the Barons. Men could regroup. The faint creak of wagon wheels reached them first, followed by the rhythmic clop of hooves. Lantern light flickered in the distance, bobbing like fireflies in the dark. Jack raised his hand. The crew tensed. The convoy came into view, 3 wagons, each flanked by mounted guards. The men rode with the easy arrogance of those who thought no one would dare touch them. Jack waited until the lead wagon was almost level with their position. Then he gave the signal. Elias's rifle cracked, the shot echoing through the night. The lead horse screamed, rearing and throwing its rider. Chaos erupted, shouts, the clatter of hooves, the snap of reins. May lit the first stick of dynamite, the fuse hissing in the dark. She hurled it toward the middle wagon. The explosion tore through the night, a bloom of fire and splinters. Horses bolted, men dove for cover. Jack was already moving, Colt in hand. He fired twice, dropping a guard who was scrambling for his rifle. Caleb slipped through the smoke like a shadow, cutting the straps on the last wagon so its load spilled into the dirt. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and burning wood. Jack's crew worked fast, grabbing rifles and ammo from the wreckage, tossing them into the grass where Cutter waited with saddlebags ready. A guard charged Jack with a saber, the blade catching the firelight. Jack sidestepped, grabbing the man's arm and slamming him into the wagon wheel. The man crumpled, groaning. Time, Caleb barked. Jack scanned the scene, 2 wagons burning, the third overturned. The road littered with crates and bodies. The surviving guards were scattering into the dark, some on foot, some on horseback. "Move," Jack ordered. They melted back into the grass, vanishing into the night as quickly as they'd struck. Behind them, the flames roared higher, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. By the time they reached Hollow Creek, the adrenaline had begun to fade, replaced by the heavy knowledge of what they'd just done. The Baron would know, and he would answer. Jack stood in the saloon's back room, the stolen rifles stacked against the wall, the silver hidden beneath the floorboards. His crew was tired but alive, their faces lit by the flicker of a single lantern. "This was just the first cut," Jack said quietly. "Now he knows we can bleed him." May's eyes were sharp. "And now he'll come for us harder than ever." Jack nodded. "Good. Let him." When the morning sun rose over Hollow Creek, the town was silent. But it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the stillness before a storm. Jack Callahan stood in the back room of the saloon, leaning over a map. The weapons and ammunition they'd taken from the Baron's convoy the night before were stacked against the wall. His crew was tired but riding high. They'd struck first, and hard. Then came the sound. At first, it was just a low hum, distant and steady. Then the clatter of wagon wheels, the pounding of hooves, and the metallic rattle of chains. Elias glanced out the door, his face tightening. "Jack, you need to see this." Jack stepped outside. Down Main Street, a dust cloud rolled closer, and within it came a grim procession. At the front, 2 armored wagons. Behind them, 4 groups of mounted gunmen. And in the center, a heavy cage wagon, its iron bars glinting in the sun. Inside the cage were faces Jack knew, men and women from Hollow Creek, people who had stood beside him during the siege, people who had never even fired a gun but had refused to bow to the Baron. Now they were shackled, bruised, and dusty, but their eyes burned with defiance. May's voice was tight. "Those are our people." The convoy halted in the middle of town. One of the riders, a tall man in a black duster with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. His voice carried like a whip crack. "Callahan, the Baron has a message." Jack walked forward, slow and steady. The man's grin was thin. "The Baron says every rifle you steal, every wagon you burn, will cost you twice as much. These people are the price for your little stunt. If you want them back, you'll hand over the weapons, leave Hollow Creek, and never come back." Jack's fists clenched. Round him, townsfolk whispered, some afraid, some furious. Elias muttered under his breath, "If we shoot now, the hostages." Jack's mind raced. A fight here would be a slaughter, but waiting meant giving the Baron the upper hand. The man in the duster leaned forward in the saddle. "You have until sundown. If you're still here by then, this cage comes back empty." The convoy turned and rolled out, the sound of chains and hooves echoing down the street long after they were gone. Back in the saloon's back room, Jack, May, Elias, and Caleb gathered around the map again. The air was thick with tension. May's voice was sharp. "We're not leaving them. But you know this is exactly what the Baron wants, to pull us into his game." Caleb nodded grimly. "It's a trap. The hostages are bait, and we're the prey." Jack's eyes stayed on the map, his voice low but certain. "Then we won't be prey. We'll take them back and show the Baron who sets the rules in this valley." In that moment, everyone in the room understood. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was personal. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, turning the valley into a black ocean of shadow. Jack Callahan crouched in the brush at the edge of the Baron's supply camp, his breath slow, his eyes fixed on the faint glow of lanterns ahead. Somewhere beyond those lights, the cage wagon sat, and inside it, the people of Hollow Creek. Elias lay prone beside him, rifle ready. May was further back, crouched over a small bundle of dynamite, her fingers working with quiet precision. Caleb Vance had already slipped into the darkness, moving like a ghost toward the far side of the camp. They'd been watching for hours, counting guards, noting patrol patterns. The Baron's men were confident. They thought no one would dare come for the prisoners before the deadline. Jack intended to prove them wrong. A guard passed within 10 feet of their position, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. Jack waited until the man's back was turned, then moved, one hand clamped over the guard's mouth. the other driving the hilt of his knife into the man's temple. The body sagged silently into the grass. Elias dragged the man out of sight while Jack signaled to May. She lit the first fuse. The faint hiss lost in the night air, and rolled the dynamite toward a stack of supply crates. The explosion was small, but sharp enough to send the guards running toward the noise. That was the opening. Jack sprinted low across the camp, Elias covering him from the shadows. He reached the cage wagon and saw them, the hostages, eyes wide, faces pale in the lantern light. "Quiet," Jack whispered, working the lock with a piece of bent wire. His hands were steady, but every second felt like a lifetime. A shout went up from the far side of camp. The guards had realized the blast was a diversion. The lock clicked. Jack swung the door open. "Move." Elias appeared, covering the rear as the hostages slipped out one by one. May was already leading them toward the tree line, her shotgun ready. Then a shot rang out, close. To close. Jack turned to see a guard leveling his rifle at May's. "Back," he fired first. The man dropped, but the camp was awake now. Lanterns flared, boots pounded. Voices shouted orders. Bullets tore through the night. Jack and Elias fell back, firing as they moved, keeping the guards' heads down. Caleb emerged from the dark, cutting down to men with quick, precise shots. They reached the trees, the hostages stumbling but alive. May was already pushing them deeper into the cover of the forest. Jack was the last to leave the clearing. He turned once, looking back at the camp, the glow of the lanterns, the shouts of the Baron's men. The chaos they'd left behind. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a blow, and the Baron would feel it. The first sign was the smell. Jack Callahan was in the blacksmith's shop with Elias, checking the rifles they'd taken from the Baron's convoy, when the acrid scent of smoke drifted in through the open door. Not the faint, comforting smell of a forge. This was sharper, dirtier. Then came the shouting. Jack was in the street in seconds, boots pounding the boards. Down the road, a column of black smoke twisted into the sky. The flames were already licking at the roof of the general store. May came running from the saloon, her face pale. "It's not just the store. They've hit 3 buildings at once." Jack's eyes swept the street. The fire was spreading fast, leaping from roof to roof in the dry evening air. Townsfolk were forming bucket lines, shouting over the roar of the flames. But even as they fought the fire, Jack knew this wasn't just destruction for its own sake. This was a message through the haze. He saw them, riders in dark coats, slipping away down the far end of Main Street. They didn't fire a shot. They didn't need to. The fire was their weapon. Jack grabbed Cutter's reins, swinging into the saddle. Elias was right behind him, rifle in hand. They tore down the street, dodging panicked townsfolk and falling embers. They caught sight of the riders just as they reached the edge of town. Jack fired, dropping one from the saddle, but the others split into the hills, vanishing into the shadows. By the time Jack returned, the damage was done. The general store was gone. The tailor's shop was a blackened shell, and the small house at the end of the street, the one where the storekeeper's boy lived, was nothing but smoldering beams. The boy stood in the street, soot streaking his face, clutching a charred rifle stock. His eyes met Jack's, and Jack felt the weight of it, the same weight he'd carried when he buried Eli. May came to stand beside him. "They're not just trying to hurt you," she said quietly. "They're trying to make you doubt yourself. Make the town doubt you." Jack's jaw tightened. "Then we'll give them something else to think about." That night, the saloon's back room was crowded. The rescued hostages were there, along with every able-bodied man and woman who'd stayed after the siege. The air was thick with smoke and determination. Jack stood at the head of the table. The map spread before him. "The Baron thinks he can burn us out. He thinks fear will do his work for him. But fear cuts both ways. We've been hitting his supply lines. Now we hit something bigger." Caleb leaned forward. "His money," Jack nodded. "The silver shipments. We take those, and we don't just hurt him, we cripple him." The room murmured in agreement. Outside, the night was quiet again, but Jack knew it wouldn't last. The Baron had drawn blood. Now it was his turn. The wind carried the smell of rain and gunpowder. Jack Callahan sat astride Cutter at the edge of the valley, staring down at the Baron's estate. The mansion's pale stone walls glowed faintly in the pre-dawn gloom, lanterns flickering along the perimeter. Beyond the gates, the land stretched wide and open, no cover, no shadows to hide in. Behind him, his crew waited. Elias checked the action on his rifle, the metal clicking in the quiet. May adjusted the strap on her shotgun, her eyes hard. Caleb Vance crouched low, scanning the ridges for movement, and scattered among them were the townsfolk who had chosen to stand, farmers, ranch hands, and shopkeepers, each armed with whatever they could carry. They all knew what this was. There would be no second chances. Jack's voice was low but steady. We go in fast. We take the gates before they can close them. Once we're inside, we split. Elias, you and the riflemen keep the guards busy. May, you get to the hostages. Caleb, you're with me. We find the Baron. No one argued. The first light of dawn crept over the hills, painting the clouds in streaks of crimson. Jack took it as a sign, blood in the sky for blood on the ground. He spurred Cutter forward. The charge was a thunderclap. Hooves pounded the earth, voices rose in a raw battle cry, and the Baron's guards scrambled to man the walls. Rifle fire cracked from the parapets, bullets whining past Jack's ears. Dirt kicked up around them, but they didn't slow Elias's. First shot took down a guard at the gate. Another fell before he could swing the heavy doors shut. Jack and Cutter slammed through the opening, the rest of the riders pouring in behind him. Inside the courtyard, chaos erupted. Guards spilled from the barracks, some half-dressed, others already firing. May's shotgun roared, scattering a cluster of men from the steps. Caleb moved like a shadow, cutting down to with quick, precise shots. Jack dismounted, drawing his Colt. The air was thick with smoke and the metallic tang of blood. He fought his way toward the main house, each step a blur of motion. A shot here, a punch there. The crunch of boots on gravel dot at the mansion doors. Two of the Baron's best stood waiting. One swung a rifle like a club. Jack ducked under it, driving his shoulder into the man's gut and sending him sprawling. The other came in with a knife, but Jack caught his wrist, twisted hard, and sent the blade skittering across the stones before dropping him with a right hook dot inside. The air was cooler, but no less tense. The polished floors were slick under his boots, the walls lined with portraits of men who had built their fortunes on the backs of others. And at the far end of the hall, the Baron waited. He stood tall, dressed in a black coat, a silver-handled revolver in his hand. His eyes were calm, almost amused. "You've made quite a mess, Callahan," he said. "But it ends here." Jack stepped forward, Colt raised. "You're right. It does." The Baron fired first. The shot tore past Jack's shoulder, splintering the frame of a painting. Jack returned fire, the bullet grazing the Baron's arm. The man didn't flinch. He advanced, firing again. They circled each other in the grand hall, the sound of gunfire echoing off marble and wood. Jack felt the burn of a graze along his ribs, but he kept moving, kept pressing. The Baron lunged, trying to close the distance. Jack sidestepped, grabbed the man's coat, and slammed him into the wall. The revolver clattered to the floor. They fought hand to hand now, fists, elbows, the crash of bodies against furniture. The Baron was strong, but Jack fought with something deeper, the memory of Eli, the faces of the townsfolk, the smell of burning homes. With a final surge, Jack drove the Baron back against the massive desk. His fist connected with the man's jaw once, twice, and the Baron went down, sprawling across the polished floor. Jack stood over him, chest heaving. This is for Hollow Creek. He didn't kill him. Death would be too quick. Instead, he hauled the Baron to his feet, dragged him outside, and threw him into the dirt in front of the townsfolk. The fight was over. The Baron's men, seeing their leader beaten, dropped their weapons. The hostages were freed. The fires in the valley would burn no more. As the sun broke fully over the hills, Jack looked out across the land. It was quiet now, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm. May stepped up beside him. "What now?" Jack adjusted his hat, eyes on the horizon. "Now, we rebuild, and we make damn sure no one tries this again." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain. For the first time in a long while, Jack let himself breathe. Hollow Creek was free.